My name is Leslie from CUTV. We're here with Mohawk Mothers to talk about rematriation, the process of restoring the Native people on their land, and the role of women as life givers and caretakers of Earth, which Natives consider to be Mother. This event is hosted by Fourth Space at Concordia University.
So I thank you all for coming, and we're going to be in conversation and dialogue for a few hours, and there will be some time for questions and exchange. And now I'd like to pass the feather over to Elise Kephart, who's going to explain a little bit about what we're all doing here today and about her role, or their role in the project. Thanks, Elise.
Yeah, hi everyone. So we just wanted to bring together the folks who are at the forefront of rematriation of the land, stewardship of the land here in Tiohtià:ke. I heard about the Gainigehagaganastatsara a couple years ago when the first injunction was won in 2022. And then I remember in 2023 there was negotiations and agreements, but not respected by McGill ultimately. So I wanted to hear from your perspective why this work is so important to you, to future generations, to ancestors, why the bringing home of children under stolen land, under the Allen Memorial Institute, the New Vic project, and most recently the SAQ in Montreal's East End. So, pass the mic.
Should we start by doing introductions?
Yeah.
Let everyone tell you a little bit about who they are and where they come from.
I think it has to be counterclockwise, Mohawk way. So we'll start with Nancy to start.
Yes, it goes in this direction.
Okay.
Thank you so much for this invitation, Kathy, Elisa, for the space. It's really an honor, a privilege to be with you, and especially with the Ganistensera. I have learned a lot from them. They are truly an inspiration. My name is Nancy Tapia Sorral. I am Colombian, and I am a human rights lawyer and a PhD in sociology, and I have dedicated over 20 years of my life working with human rights defenders across the Americas, and in the last decade mainly with indigenous women leaders from across the different regions and the different countries who are facing abuses in connection to mega projects, whatever form or shape they take. And in that journey, I came across the Mohawk Mothers who have, made things in a way that is truly necessary for us to learn and to follow and to support. So I feel privileged to be with you all here, and especially with the mothers. Thank you.
So my name is Gordon Douglas Roxanne Whitebeam, and I'm a Mohawk from Tiohtià:ke. I was born and raised in my community, and I'm a filmmaker in my professional life. I work in both fiction and documentary, but my role on this project is that I'm a cultural monitor, so I am usually on site during the digs and the excavations to search for the remains of our missing children. And it's an honor to be here, so thank you very much.
I'm Concordia. I'm from Tiohtià:ke. I have worked in Ottawa at the Department of Indian Affairs, just putting my nose in there to find out what's going on, get some information, which I did, and then I got fired after 20 years, so it took that long for them to get me out of there. But basically, I have children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and have tried, and from the time I was born, basically, I sat in the Longhouse and listened to the talk about the Great Law that I am going to go. And so I grew up knowing, understanding it, actually, maybe. I understand it, the deeper part of it. and how it came down to us from our ancestors, and how we relate to it and relate to everything around us. And I think that's probably the most important part, is to speak the language and then learn it. And then the language comes from our Mother Earth, and so we learn the language, we hear it, and then eventually we see it, see the pictures that it makes, and then after that we start to speak it. And then we start to understand a lot of things about creation. And I think that's probably the most important part of my upbringing. And then I was forced, of course, to go to the government school. And anyway, that was, I have to say, it was unpleasant. But I don't want to talk about it. Anyway, so now I have, there's about, I don't remember how many children and all of these that I have, and I've raised many other children who have come and lived with me and grew up with me, and I took care of them, and that's what we do. We give of whatever we have to offer, we do it. So that's what I did. So whatever you want to know, and if I want to tell you, I will.
Thank you. I'm Philippe Blouin. I'm called Okwaragan by the Ghani, and I'm a PhD candidate at this time in anthropology at McGill University. And I've been accompanying the Ghani throughout their struggle for several years now. Thanks for having me.
Oh, okay, we're done.
Yeah, so we're hoping that you would just like to tell us about your current project, what have you been doing, and what are some of the challenges that you're facing. We could start there. Would you like that?
I think I'll ask Okwaraga to explain it. He does it in such a nice way for students.
Yeah.
And you'll probably understand it pretty good.
Well, to start from the beginning, perhaps, well, the beginning goes way back because knowledge of what happened to the children who were taken away has been among indigenous peoples forever when it was happening. And so there was always a memory of these disappearances and a will to find them. But this started to be acknowledged with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which ended in 2015, and then the unfortunate discovery of evidence of unmarked graves in Kamloops, British Columbia, which started a nationwide search for unmarked graves on residential school sites. However, these searches were mainly concerned with residential schools, but these were not the only locations where Indigenous children were being sent and where they disappeared. Specifically in Quebec, there were a bit less residential schools, and more children would be lost after being in Quebec's healthcare system. And so there's current searches about that. And that's how it started with the Ghani with this construction project at the old Royal Victoria Hospital on Mount Royal, whose indigenous name, Ganingehaga name, is Diganunda, which means two mountains. And so this is also acknowledged at the traditional territory and the location of the pre-colonial villages that were there. And there were many very important archaeological discoveries in the immediate vicinity of the campus of McGill University, the Dawson site. More recently, around 2017, there was they discovered by accident on the corner of Peel and Sherbrooke remnants of a longhouse, burials, kernels of corn, purely by accident. And these were really tucked in around old pipes, really, that the site had been disturbed many times over, but there were still these very significant traces. And so the Ghani heard about this construction project happening at the Royal Victoria Hospital site to transform it into a new campus for McGill University. The New Vic project, it was called. The thing is that this hospital was a known location where it was a hospital for the poor, and many indigenous people were sent there, including Inuit people, and all the period, post-war period with the tuberculosis and all that. And especially on that land also there is an institution called the Allen Memorial Institute, which is actually McGill's Department of Psychiatry, and also the outpatient psychiatric service of the Royal Victoria Hospital. And so this whole site was slated for construction, and there were concerns because there were allegations online and also memories from the community in Ganawake that children, indigenous children were sent there, notably for intelligence tests. There was this whole network, well, it was an endeavor actually in which the Canadian Army was also involved to do these intelligence tests with indigenous children throughout the Turtle Island to determine which one, their assimilability. And so they would target children, screen them, and some would be incarcerated in case they were considered unruly. And so there was this memory, but there were also more recent allegations from survivors of medical experiments in this institute. Actually was the main hub, the Allen Memorial Institute, of these medical experiments called the MK Ultra program, which is really, this is one of the bases of many conspiracy theories, because it's one of the instances where some evidence was found of the CIA, Central American Intelligence Agency, doing this research on mind control and brainwashing. And so in the 50s and 60s, the Allen Memorial Institute was one of the main locations where these experiments were led by a certain doctor called Ewan Cameron. And so there were allegations from survivors, and there are very few that are still alive right now, but in particular one survivor, Lana Ponting, who now lives in Winnipeg. She was there when she was 16 years old, and she remembered seeing indigenous children there. She even befriended one called Morning Star, and who suddenly disappeared one day. And she also remembered seeing at night outside evidence of excavation of what she thought to be burials, clandestine burials happening at night. And so with this testimony, the Ganistansra, accompanied by really a small DIY team without any funding, without any lawyers either, they undertook to bring the matter. Well, first there was a public consultation brought by the city, and so they made representations there, but actually this public consultation had no decision-making power, and so then they had to address the courts because there was a refusal to cooperate from the part of McGill University and the Société Québécoise des Infrastructures, which is the infrastructure branch of the Quebec government, who says that it owns the land according to the colonial ownership system, although, well, the importance of this land as the location of the pre-colonial villages and also the potential unmarked burials brought a strong interest from the caretakers of this land. I think that's what we're here to talk about, is about this land stewardship, what it means for the Ganistansra. And so this led to a judicial process which eventually was successful for the Ganistansra. And we've been told this was the first instance in Canada where self-represented Indigenous people won an injunction to halt a construction project. And after this injunction was won in October 2022, there were negotiations that led to a settlement agreement being signed with all the parties. And when we're talking all the parties, on the other side of the table, there were Canada, Quebec, the Société Québécoise des Infrastructures, McGill University Health Center. They had up to 17 lawyers working on the other side, with no lawyer on the side the Gamistansra. Although there was the Kimberly Murray, the special interlocutor on marked burials, who was chosen by the federal government after the discoveries in Kamloops to study and assess the legislative roadblocks that make the searches for missing children very complicated. And so she joined also the proceedings as a third party. And so this led to this settlement agreement being signed in April 2023 that allowed for a panel of expert archaeologists, experts in searching for unmarked graves and using remote sensing, non-invasive methods, such as ground penetrating radar. There's some dogs also, historic human remains detection dogs. And so they were mandated to determine which techniques would be used on the land. And this has been happening ever since. As we speak, there is still archaeology being done before any construction work on the site.
It started out as the Palestinians in 2015 came out to Ganawage to talk to us about what was going on at McGill and what was going on in Palestine. They brought a lot of paperwork, freedom of information that they had, and they showed it to us. They spent the day with us. We were just shocked and horrified with what was happening. And also they had 6 what they call war labs, where they were creating weapons and doing a lot of research on behalf of these big weapons conglomerates. And the weapons were being used in their country, in Palestine. And then they told us of how they were being treated there. And the reason why they came out to see us was they'd been studying and they realized that we had been through that ourselves, that we were certainly a much smaller population today than we once were. We were everywhere, and our nations were very large and strong, and they knew about that. So so they left, and a few days later, I was thinking about all the things they've been saying, and one of the other people and I went to some of their meetings and started learning more about what was happening there in Palestine. So I decided to write a letter to the university, to McGill, and well, it wasn't a letter. I seized McGill University, me, myself, just myself. I signed it myself because I can, because I'm a sovereign person, and this is my land, and I have duties and responsibilities to take care of my land. That's our mother. So I wrote this seizure notice, and one of the things I asked for was that they have no right to be creating these weapons of mass destruction, all kinds of weapons to attack people in other parts of the world. They have done that to us here, so we've already been through it and still going through it in other ways. Anyway, so that was part, and I asked them to produce a receipt for this land that they called their own, and that's one of the things that they couldn't provide. And you know, and I made it known that this is our land, and money was taken from the Indian Trust Fund to build McGill University, and they never paid any of it back. And it started out in 1820, and they kept taking money from which was being held in trust by the country, by Canada, and they never paid anything back. So I'd like to find somebody who can figure out how much is owing, because I think they should pay it. They should pay it back or whatever. Anyway, so we brought up all of that, and so I brought it all up. served it through sending it by registered mail. And then I put it on Mohawk Mission News, which is something I run, and sent it out. And I sent it to the, I guess she's the principal, or they have so many different names for these people. And she received it because when you send something by registered mail, they, you know, they have to receive it. They sign for it. So they did that, but they didn't respond. So we waited for a couple of years, waiting for a response. We said, we would like to have a meeting with you about this. So they didn't, we didn't hear from them. So one day, oh, by the way, right after that was served on them, the students became really interested. This is in 2015. And one of the newspapers, it was called the McGill Daily. I think they're still around. This guy called up and he says, do you think I could interview you about this seizure you've taken against McGill? I said, no. He said, why not? I said, well, I'd like you to study it and see if there's anything wrong in there. So he called me back about 3 days. He said, every single thing you said in there was true. So I said, okay, you can interview me. So then I thought it had died down, but they were having a powwow in front of McGill. This is about a year later. And I was there with my granddaughter, who was a McGill student. And we were walking around. I said, you go and talk to your friends. I said, I'm just going to walk around. So I'd walk up to people and they'd say, I'm the Hontinecta, I'm from Ganawagi, and I own this land here. And I own this university. Really? Then I'd explain it to them. And then I'd go and talk to some other people, and some of them said, hey, I've wanted to meet you. So we talked. And then there was one guy that said something to me. He says, I'm a law student. And we had a great big meeting about that seizure that you filed on us. I said, really? Yes, we were there all day. Everybody was there. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, we went through the whole thing all day, and at the end, it was decided that if this ever went to court, I would win. That's what he said. So then everybody said, well, then what do we do now? He said, nothing. We're going to set it aside and never talk about it again. He told me that. That's what they did. But they did do something. They started to put something in their, I guess, on the, whenever you go on site, something about McGill, it says that this is Indigenous land, and also that it was never ceded, and they acknowledged that. So, well, that's a change. But I still wanted to meet with that woman that was the prime minister there at McGill. Anyway, but I didn't hear back from her. So then things went on for quite a while, but that afterwards, people talked about it. Some students knew about it, but it was kept pretty quiet. So me and another Mohawk mother decided to do something about it. 2 of us. In the end, there was 4 of us that finally took it to court. And we signed on. My signature is like this. That's my signature. That's how we signed it. At first, there was a bit of a fuss. And we said, oh, our people signed a whole lot of stuff back in the day. What are you going to do with all that if you don't accept ours? And they accepted it. Anyway, that's just another story. So that's how it got started. Right there was the Palestinians. we mentioned the Palestinians in there. And the other day I was walking around up on McGill, where the encampment is, and they had a big stack of those papers. They were giving it out to people to show that this has been ongoing, that it is something that started quite a while ago. So I just thought I'd tell you that.
Do you have any more questions?
Yeah, do you want to
She
tell us
has
about your interest? Or, yeah.
Just a small,
Yes.
a small comment, because when you told me about the whole story and how it started and all that, being a human rights lawyer, I was like, you don't have a lawyer? And Philip Okara was like, no, but you don't understand, we don't have a lawyer. I'm like, how are you, facing the whole system? And then Dinata was like, very clearly, we have in us what we have to say whenever we have to say, because we are part of creation and creation is part of us. And it's, the way they approach the whole problem and how it has evolved, and the fact that they managed to get where they are, representing themselves with their own traditional law, with their ancestral law given by creation, and following what the ancestors said and how they said it, I find that particularly important at a global scale.
Do you want to hear about it? how we did it? Well, we filed, and we signed it the way we sign it, and we took it to court, filed it, did everything, no lawyers, just ourselves. And we had 2 men's fire with us. They are I hate to say this, but they're the warriors who everybody's so afraid of. Anyway, they're part of it. They're part of our life. And they are there to protect us. So we filed this, and they had to accept. They accepted it. We appeared in court a couple of times, and they tried to make us get some lawyers. And we said, no, we would never get lawyers, because they pledged allegiance to the crown and to everybody that's trying to kill us. So no, we're not going to allow that. We're going to use our own power as individuals, being placed here by creation on this earth to take care of our mother, each other, and everything that grows here. That's who we are, and we will do that ourselves. So, of course, the other party started sending us, I don't want to say too much about it, because it's still in court, but I'm just going to tell you how it happened in the beginning. So then they started sending us piles of different cases that had gone on, of how, we were going to lose this case, we were going to lose it. There was thousands of pages. Anyway, eventually the judge saw that they couldn't argue this, that was our right. We're here, we're the first ones here, we're here to do that, take care of the land, and so on, and this is how we're going to do it. And we could speak for ourselves, and that's what we've been doing for 2 years now.
Well, actually, it was pretty interesting, because it was the way that the Attorney General of Quebec responded when the Ghanaians represented themselves in court. Quebec asked for them to have a lawyer, and made a motion, and we have to force a lawyer on them. But what happened is that the Ghanaians then made amendments to the original application. To say, because in the Quebec law, any given group can only be represented by a lawyer. If it's not a lawyer, you would need the signature of every single person or something like that. But then what the Ghanaians has said in their amendments is that it's like there is a cultural prohibition with relinquishing personal individual sovereignty to a lawyer. In Ghanaian tradition, everyone has to be free and has to enforce their own duties and responsibilities. And so this is really, it goes completely against the grain of, you know, the way that political and legal representation happens in Western society, where someone's deciding for you, whereas here it was really a cultural obligation, even for the Kanisansra, to caretake the land and to watch over the children of past, present, and future generations. And that was eventually accepted by the judge, you know, that any single person can sort of represent a common interest of their nation, because it really taken on themselves this task. And so I was wondering, maybe asking Roxanne and Gantineda how this came to you, and you know, when you were raised in your upbringing of feeling that you really have this duty.
So I was raised in a very politically charged longhouse, and I started going to court when I was around maybe 7 or 8 years old, and we used to travel to Ottawa all the time. And I remember this was like shortly following the 1990 Oka crisis, which we, Ganawage and Ganasadage, experienced, and I was 6 years old at the time. So, you know, shortly following the Oka crisis and going to court, I remember seeing like militias of non-Indigenous people there screaming at us. But what I remember is the elders telling me, you know, don't listen to them. You're here for a reason. You're here to fight for children. So we were fighting for Indigenous children to be able to stay with their families on reserve, as opposed to being removed. So this must have been around 1993, 92. And I remember them saying, you're a sovereign person, so when they say to rise and stand for the crown, you're not going to stand. And I remember being really nervous about it, but in time I learned that to be a sovereign person, you swear into a sovereign declaration. And I know that some will say, oh, it's a show of respect to the crown to stand, but considering all the disrespect that and the injustice that we've experienced and that I've experienced in my lifetime, I didn't feel like I should stand. I'm one of the youngest Indian day school survivors in my community. I come from the very youngest generation. The Sisters of St. Anne left the Cattery School, which was the Indian day school in Ganawage, in the year of 1988, which was the year I started school. So I'm one of the youngest claimants on the class action lawsuit, and I continued fighting for the land and water, and it became so much, like, for one person to, I guess, take on, or, you know, like, because there are various factions and people have different interests, and so I decided to fight for the land and water. But my grandmother, or my great-grandmother, is a residential school survivor. My mother survived the 1960 scoop, but she was returned to Ganawage before she turned 1 year old. So, you know, growing up, being a part of, like, experiencing that intergenerational trauma, and then, you know, the 1990 Oka crisis, but then also being a part of, like, the youth who were removed from our communities, and I'm a part of the Millennium Scoop as well. And I aged out of care when I was legally emancipated at the age of 17, and I had to figure out my way in the world, and I think I was very fortunate to be one of the few who had a very solid foundation in my culture. And I had really amazing, strong elders to lean on, and not all Indigenous youth who age out of care can say that. So, you know, considering all of that, when I was asked, are you willing to be a cultural monitor? I was like, okay, what are the protocols? And it's really hard for me to talk about anything because it's all confidential. But, you know, being there, like, I'm definitely there for the families, for the children, and I'm doing the very best that I can do. So, yeah.
Well, I just want to take a minute and acknowledge what you just said. It sounds like you've had a pretty challenging road, and we're just so grateful that you're here today and fighting for those behind and in front. We don't want any more children removed from communities and from their teachings and their loved ones and elders. And it's just so important that you're a role model and you continue this. And I'm just so in awe of how you just keep putting one foot in front of the other and just keep going, and someone will put up a new wall and you'll just kind of see if it'll push down. Or it's not. Okay. Yeah, so you put one foot in front of the other, you keep going till you hit a wall, and you push to see if that wall is going to come down or not, and if not, you get help. But always maintaining that sense of sovereignty, you know, that it's so important, that concept of dignity and personhood, and I'm not going to give that away to the state, to the crown, to a lawyer, but I'll stand in my whole being for my people, with my people, to do this. Yeah, I just wanted to offer that reflection, and it's so great that they have you behind them, you know, holding up this work in the going between the worlds, right? I mean, that we all move between the worlds, but you really are working in the system. If you are studying at McGill, the place where you're challenging, I mean, even that has its tensions, I imagine. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Nancy, did you want to
add something?
Yeah, just.
No, I mean, it's, you know, I come from Latin America, and we always look up to Canada and other countries. I think it's part of the system itself that has told us to kind of do it that way. So when I arrived here with all my work in Latin America, of course I thought I was going to find many solutions and advanced, you know, formulas or laws, and then the more I hear and the more I learn, I truly believe that there are many common problems across the whole region, independently of who has done what, wherever, or what colony, or, you know, if it's from one side of the Europe or the other. And yet, you know, in essence, what you are doing, you know, defending the land, the people, the dignity, with such a courage, is a true inspiration, you know, and the fact that you are doing things in a way that is not only for your people, I believe is for all of us, you know, because there is clearly an imbalance in the world, and Mother Earth, and I'm here just sharing with you some of the things I have learned also from the Canistensera and other indigenous women leaders across the Americas, that imbalance, we are feeling it in many different ways. And one of those is, for example, the climate emergency we are facing, and it's because you use a word that explains it very clearly. You know, things have been deeply disturbed. So what I see in what you are doing is that you are healing all of us, healing the land, and healing so many families, and I very much appreciate that, and we need more of that. That's just my small comment. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe there's one, I don't know if you followed in the news these last weeks, there was François Legault, the Prime Minister of Quebec, regrettably, who made this announcement for a new museum of the Quebec nation. And he brought in this museum's official historian, who made this quote that shocked lots of people, because he said, well, Indigenous people are not part of the exhibit because the history of Quebec starts with Champlain when he came, because history is writing, and so if it was before there was any writing, well, it's not part of history. So this is like the current ideology that is running this province. But just the way that the Canistensera struggle and related to the land how, it's really fighting for some basic respect in the protocols that will allow for excavation, for this disturbance of the land to happen. And we know that all development projects really rely on this, land disturbance. But there's something, because one of the upcoming challenges of this lawsuit will be a constitutional challenge on the Quebec Cultural Heritage Act, which regulates the archaeology, the way it's being done. And this law was devised in the 60s at a time of great nationalism for French Canadian, and I am French Canadian myself, or Québécois. But all these words are ultimately indigenous words, Canada, Quebec, but Quebecers don't even know what it means. But anyway, so this law presents everything under the ground as being the property of the Quebec state and part of Quebec's cultural heritage. But how is it that when you reach a certain depth within the soil, things that are there were put there before the first settlers came? And so if Quebec is rejecting its own, the history before the first French settlers came here as being part of its legacy, well, how can it deem to have property over what's within the ground? And so this is the general problem of, this necessary rematriation of all existing reality, starting with under the ground. And this is a way just to put back, in the hands of the real caretakers of this land, the remnants of, the people that were here before. Everything under the ground, for example, you can take some carrots to have a pollen count of what existed before, and this is fascinating because you can recreate the whole forest and how land was managed beforehand. But this is destroyed when there is a development project and they build a 10-story underground basement, and all this soil is gotten rid of. So this is also the proof. And as Canada acknowledged a genocide against Indigenous people, this soil that is being gotten rid of through development is the forensic proof of these crimes against humanity. And that's also a reason why it has to be preserved and why it belongs to Indigenous people. Yes.
I had an interesting meeting. There were some police there at the encampment, and just near the erotic gates, and there was another person and myself, Ellen Gabriel from Concordia. I said, let's go and say hello to them. They're all standing there in their black, all dressed in black. And the boss there was a tall woman. I said, let's go see her. So we did, and we were all happy and smiling. It was a nice day. And, how are you? I just came over to say hello to you. And she was kind of surprised. And then she asked Ellen, who are you? She says, I'm Ellen Gabriel of Concordia. Oh my God, she got scared because she was the spokesman during 1990. Very, very well known and very articulate. And then she said, and she went right up to my face and she said, and who are you? I said, I'm the Hananekta. She goes, that was her expression. I said, we just came over here, to say hello and tell you that, you're standing on our land, and unfortunately, the land is in pretty bad shape. You've got about 6 or 8 feet of garbage, and then on top of that, you put canvas, so nothing can ever come through there from our mother, so we can't feel her. And then you put some grass on it. I said, just think of what you're doing to our mother, and she can't feel us, the people walking on her, because that's where we get our energy. That's where we get our, our inspiration, is to walk on her. And she started saying, oh, I didn't know that. I said, yes, you're on my land. You are standing on my land. and you don't get anything out of it. I said, look at this, look around you. That is ugly. It is so ugly. I think you should tear it all down and bring it back to the way it is meant to be, showing our mother naturally. And then she got very upset and she walked away. And, first she started to cry. And then she walked away and she phoned somebody right away. So Ellen and I walked away. But I just realized that I think you people do realize that. Everybody does know that. And we've got to respect our mother. But I said to her too, I said, all you've done is you've pillaged and you've raped our mother. I said, we can't stand it. We can't stand it. We can't even feel her. And that's when she started to cry. She realized how we are suffering because of that, because of what's happened. Poisons and toxins everywhere. You can't even drink the water. You can't even use the water. You have to boil it. All these things. Stopping the natural, relationship that we have with our mother. And we want to have that back. We have to have it back. That's why we're here. We have to. And we need everybody's help to do it. We just can't do it ourselves.
May I just to say, I was truly shocked. I went one day to the office of the Anistan in their territory. And then, of course, I had to go to the bathroom. And when I was about to wash my hands and put a little bit of water in my face, as if I would do it here at the university or in my house, the smell was not nice at all. And then, for me, that's shocking because it's just the other side of the island. But we are in the same territory and it's their land, and they have no access to that clean water. And it is an issue. And then when I went out, I saw the water bottles, and then I remember you made a comment. I'm so tired of seeing these plastic water bottles, and then in that little moment, I realized, as you just explained to us so eloquently, the magnitude of the damage. I don't think we realize the magnitude of it yet. We are just starting to feel it in some way. But then when I see these struggles, it's not the local struggle. This is in a much bigger, larger scale, and that's why what I truly see is necessary to connect and to support, because they are already doing a lot, and I admire the fact that they are doing it from the fact of being women, mothers, in regards to Mother Earth, because it's a different ethic, a different perspective, and it is so much needed.
Yes, there's many cases of environmental racism. I think last year there were some things in the news about Sitage, about landfill, because this is like a land, independent territory of the Mohawk Nation, but still considered crown land. Well, like the environmental protections sort of don't apply. But still, the settler population is using these to dump toxic waste without any regulations. It's cheaper to do it, but then it's the community who suffer from it. This is really the case in Ganasage and Akwesasne especially, that it's really bad.
Yeah, recently Kim Tallbear wrote in her blog, after being on a plane that was filled with miners, she said, this isn't a country, this is a series of land extraction sites, a series of mines. When I started hearing about the children and how the graves are being found, and a movement swept across the country after Kamloops, and I had this feeling like these children were calling out to us. They were appearing, like asking for help in some way. And so I'm just wondering if you think ahead a little bit and you achieve your aims,
and some of these children can go home to their communities, what would we do for them? How would you like to honor them and celebrate that victory?
We're having a hard time right now even getting the documents to find those children. They're being kept from us because it's probably worse than what we even know what happened to our people, because most of our population was killed off. The Mohawks in particular, they have a special law in the United States. George Washington passed it to kill every one of us and not to spare any of us. And so some of us had to come up in this direction, some went in other directions, and so on. And that law is still there. And I remember speaking to some students here at McGill, and I asked them, how many of you vote in the election? So they just, yeah, I vote. I said, do you know what you're voting for? He said, what? I said, well, you're voting for the Indian Act, the Indian Lands Act, the Civilization Act, and all these acts that are out there to kill us off. The Indian Lands Act of 1925 it took us off our lands with the military, put us on these POW camps, and kept us incarcerated right to this day. And they took the children away from our families, we never saw them again. And this just happened right across the country all at the same time. October the 25th, 1924. It's 100 years. It's called the 100 Years' War. The 100-year plan. It's the business plan of Canada. That's what it's called. Well, that's what we call it. But they called it that too. And so in 100 years, they were to completely annihilate us. If there was any of us left, we would just, with a stroke of a pen, we were going to no longer be Native people. Their law would make us into white people. I don't know how they're going to do it, but that. So now, October the 25th is coming up. We want people to know that that's coming up and what it signifies. Anyway, I told these students that. And I said, have any of you ever tried to stop that? These laws that you've made, that you vote for to kill us off? Have you ever voted and said, I will not vote for this, I will not vote for this government that's doing this? And none of them, not a one of them ever even knew anything about it. But I'm going to tell you about it, because it's time for you to stand up and do something about that law, those laws. They're going to put it into fruition this year, 1924. From 1920, am I getting all my dates mixed up? It was in 1924, and this is now 2024. So it's the 100-year plan. The plan was called the final solution to the Indian problem. And you know what that solution is? That there will be no more Native people here. That's the problem that they're trying to get rid of, is us. And it's still on because they never took away that law. It's still there. And also there's nobody that ever got punished for what was done to us. All the murders and all the things that were done to us. The genocide. Nobody has been punished for that.
Yeah, on the contrary, if you go to McGill, you see, Lord Strathcona, Donald Smith everywhere, and all across the country. And that man was instrumental in getting residential schools up and going, like you call them prisoner of war camps. Camps for children. We have a course in First People Studies called the Indian Act and Resistance to it. And in researching that course, another nefarious year was 1936, because they were always changing the act to suit their needs. But in that year, they changed the so-called governance or the oversight of status First Nations people from the Ministry of the Interior to the Department of Lands, Mines, and Resources. So the mining company CEOs were making the major decisions about First Nations people. So it shows that marriage. And in a minute, I'm going to pass the mic to some of our students to offer a reflection or a question, but I saw if you wanted to say something.
Oh, no, well, just about this Indian Lands Act, 1924, 1936, when indigenous people were, being under mines and resources was like considering them as part of, the landscape or part of or with the animals, it's like part of the landscape and not as human, and that's how human rights were deprived. But the way that, what's the most frightening is the very duplicitous way in which these termination policies are done right now, today, is through, signing all these memorandums of understanding and these modern treaties that are being set up all across the territory. Ultimately, there's supposed to be a referendum, for it to be vouched, and you would need, for these treaties to happen, there would be eventually a referendum. But even that, it's not the indigenous way to have this 50% plus one type of democracy. That's not a type that's not a consensus that is based in the families as the old ways function. And so in all these treaties that are being elaborated amongst these lawyers behind closed doors, the thing that Canada always pushes to appear in those treaties is a small clause called the certainty clause. And this will systematically say, and it's sort of hidden in thousands of pages of, legal gibberish. You will have this one sentence that guarantees that the land is within Canada. And this is where the actual transfer of the land happens, And when we're talking about land claim policies and all these comprehensive land claim policies, and this is the way that the courts treat with that, well, it's not the indigenous people who are claiming land. Canada is claiming these land because it is not yet theirs, and they can only acknowledge that. So that's all these dealings that lead to enfranchising indigenous people as indigenous Canadians, or as reservations would become municipalities. This is the constant colonial blackmail that is being done. If we want to get rid of those old 19th century Victorian Indian Act racist policies, the only alternative is becoming Canadians, not having a separate status at all. And perhaps, you can have cultural rights to have your own ceremonies and all that, as any Canadian can have their own religion, but it's a private thing and it does not affect the land.
And undermines nationhood. So if we talk about Mother Earth and not about land, I also appreciate how you use the term rematriation, and in your culture you are a matriarchal society. I'm just wondering if the ladies would like to say a word about mothering, and what are the roles and responsibilities of mothering and caring for the children. And also I appreciate that you've made Philip an honorary mother, an honorary Mohawk mother. That's cool.
There's two things that, you're talking about nation.
Nation. We aren't a nation.
Okay.
That's something that white man, statehood. We aren't. We're in our case, we're the Rodino-Sun-Umwe. We are the original people of this land. We're placed here by creation. So that's who we are. And as far as women have a very high position in our culture, the same as the men. Equal. We have our duties and responsibilities, and the men have theirs. And this is how we work it out between ourselves through our families. And families make up the whole of our people. There are 49 families, and we're all related. And we all know who our family is everywhere. And so we have clans and so on and so on. Nothing to do with nations, because nation is statehood, and we are not. And then the land does not belong to us. It's not our land. The land belongs to the unborn babies, children. They own it. So we have to keep that land ready for when they arrive. And it is the women that emulate the work of the land, what the land does. We emulate that. So I just wanted to.
Thank you.
So being a matrilineal society, it means that our clans are very much like, our clans are our families very much like a last name. So I come from the Wolf Clan family. My mother is a Wolf Clan, and so I have children, and I passed my clan on to my children, and when my daughters have children, the family will be passed on to them as well. And so our responsibility is to name our children, and within our culture, we're not supposed to have two people with the same name, and the name is passed through ceremony, and usually at certain times of the year with all of the people present. And but because of colonialism, because of intergenerational trauma, we have multiple factions and variations of our like longhouse, and there are people that have the same name now, and so it's just important to, like, moving forward, how do we move forward, and just being respectful to one another within our communities and our beliefs is one of the ways that we can achieve that. And it's necessary that we always promote unity as women and respect for one another. And so, yeah, our responsibility is mostly to raise the children and make sure that they're in a healthy environment, but to collaborate with the men. I know some people say that the women are like the leaders and the final say, but I don't believe that. I think that everything we do is in balance with one another. And yeah, so that's basically the roles and responsibilities.
Beautiful. Some of our students are going to ask you questions or offer a reflection. Thank you. She knows I can't walk very well. Here you go. Thanks, Alexandra.
Thanks so much for sharing. I have, I guess, a few comments and questions. One thing that really stuck out to me was how, like, this, like, your story of, like, how this all started, and it started through solidarity and talking with other peoples about, like, their own experiences. And something about that to me is just, like, super empowering, and I think it's a really good, it really shows how common experiences can come together to create change, like here, or at least like start that kind of movement. And I also appreciated your distinction on sovereignty, because I've been thinking about, I know like terms like indigenous sovereignty and nationhood and stuff are used so often, but I've been wondering how to understand those terms. What, like, not in the way of like statehood and state formation, so just like you sharing on that was really, really helpful in terms of, yeah, thinking about that. I guess my question is, like, I think a bit more personal. I'm wondering, when you come, not that you're ever coming away from this work, but when you go home and you sit down, it's like, how can you, not think about this? Like, what do you do in your life to kind of, I guess, like, heal from your interactions with, like, the court system, these lawyers, like, all of, like, I don't know, the outside noise, I guess.
We don't. It's in our minds because we're born that way. we're taught, you're sitting in the longhouse when you're only 3 years old and you start learning all this. And eventually you start to see it and you start to understand what these older people are doing, and as you grow up you start doing the same thing. You can't get away from it. You start to feel your energy. And we learn the language, we know the language. Myself, I only spoke Mohawk until I was 10 years old. But the way you learn it and what it does to your mind, to me anyway, you learn it from, well, as my grandmother said, Garona. That means the language is a song. And you learn it from your mother, the earth. You feel that song coming from the mother. And then eventually you begin to start to see the images that come with that song. And then as you get older, you start to talk, you start to see, put words to the image. So then it becomes a part of the way you think and the way you feel and the way you interact, and you start to see it every time you, whenever you're somewhere, you always see the image first. At least I do. I always see it. And when we're sitting together as indigenous people, Mohawks, we do. That's how we talk. The words are very, very long because we have no nouns. We have no nouns in our language. Isn't that odd?
Wonderful.
So our names are all, none of them are nouns. I've seen, I've met people that call themselves Little Leaf or, Sun Cloud, something like that. Our names all have to do with a movement, because that's what life is. You're born, you move. You get through life, you're moving constantly. So that means you never quit. You're always, your mind is always moving. People you meet, you start talking. And this is how our children become very intelligent in that way. I'm not saying in your way. In the white way, it's very difficult for us. We have a hard time with it. But in our own way, we can visualize everything. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. It is very difficult for others. So one of the ways they decided to completely wipe us out was to take away our language. And we're getting it back. It's coming back because it's natural. It's more natural for us. And all the names that we give our children, as she said, no two people have the same name. If somebody comes along and is younger than you and has your name, they have to change their name. Or if somebody older has the same name, then you have to change your name. And that's happened twice now in my family, one of my daughters. And so now you see how important and how individual we are as a people, that we come into the world, even when we're born. As the baby is born, we start talking in Mohawk because we can still actually talk to our ancestors because they're still connected to our ancestors as they're being born. So we talk to them. I'm the one that does it now because I'm the oldest in the family. So I do it. I go there and I talk to them and I welcome them. And I promise our ancestors that we will take care of them and we will give them a good name because we know they brought something with them. There is something special in that child, that baby. And we will watch and we will look for that child. We will nurture that child. We promise that. And we give a name to the child that gives them an idea of the things that they're supposed to do, the direction they're supposed to go. Like my name is Bahagineta, which means that I am going very quickly ahead. That's what it's called. Bahagineta, heading in a certain direction. But these are the kind of names we have. And if you hear that 100 times a day, somebody say your name, that then you start to realize, oh, I better be doing something that goes according to my name. And what does your name mean?
My name, Granohirogwas, means that I'm cleaning, like wiping the sky. And yeah, I think it's, the elders say that the name that you're given is what you strive to become, that your spirit pushes you towards. And I feel like Gahanineta is very fitting for you.
Maybe others would like on the panel would like to respond to a question before.
Can't hear you.
Maybe somebody else on the panel would like to respond to a question before but I kind of almost forgot what I was going to say because the elements of what you were saying are so profound and so deep, but it's in my head. You know, I really do agree, but I hate the word equality in terms of men and women because the roles are so different, but I understand. But I think in today's world, I am essentially here because I see matricism about the woman, and I think, you know, there's a lack of status for women generally in the world. You walk the street and you see Aboriginal women, first women, you know, of Canada on the street corner, you know, in the winter, the only ones that you'd see sort of there, and maybe people who are, you know, casted out. So I think we need to really elevate the status of women and make it, I would say, even more important in men because men have had that importance for so long. And I think in my own family, I couldn't imagine, there's a sort of essentiality about the function of the women. And so I don't like the word equal because I think now we need to make women even more supreme, you know, than, you know, the normal. Yeah. And that's it. But I'm not disagreeing with you guys about equality and stuff. It's just that focus needs to be maybe a little more on the woman in my point of view. Thank you.
Nancy's going to respond.
Yeah, because there was one part of your question that was very important, and it was also like how to deal with such a very intimidating and we would say an aggressive system that is not willing to accept all what they just explained to us, which is very powerful and very true to their own laws and to their own practices. And of course, that power that is the prevalent power is, of course, is intimidated by this power. And I have seen it not only with them, but also with many of the other indigenous women I have worked with across the Americas. You know, when they, in your question and also with what you were saying, when they go, I have seen them, of course, from the back and seen them given interviews and maybe there in the side, in the royal big side, and they always do it from a place of power. They never do it from a place of victimhood. Of course, they acknowledge that there have been victims, that what happened has been very grave human rights violations that need to be addressed. But then when they address these issues, they don't do it from a place of weaknesses. They do it from being weak, you know, they do it from their strength. And from what I have learned from them very clearly and explicitly is that that power goes beyond them. And that power is from and goes back to creation, and that's exactly what Gahendineta just explained to us in the figure of this baby being born with the connection with the ancestors and bringing us so many other learnings and powers that we need at this moment. The problem is that we are immersed in a system that has not allowed us to see beyond what we should be allowed by this system to see. But then when you start to explore that, and I say that because my PhD was precisely about understanding when indigenous women leaders have, and their mobilizations, have impact on corporate actors involved in mega projects. Like, for example, when an indigenous woman leader from Latin America can impact on the World Bank, and then the World Bank has to withdraw from the ancestral territory. More or less in a different context, how these women managed to get this legal order to stop this work in the royal peak. Yes, so how do they do it? And it's because they are not only acting with a legal system, they are acting and they are taking action from a much more complex understanding of the world that involves, in my analysis and my theoretical framework that is called the braided action framework. They are using, of course, the power in the territory that involves nature, involves the spiritual world, it involves the individual and collective world. And also they are doing it using some human rights framing, because you are able to articulate that in all the messages, and in your interviews we get the message that there have been very grave human rights violations, and they use that framing legally and in institutional and non-institutional means. But also they do it using their leadership. And this is not the traditional understanding of leadership of just one individual representing the whole movement. This is collective, and this goes back to your question, because how do they deal with that? Well, I have seen them, after a very tense conference. I mean, I didn't realize it was that tense because I was not really aware of who was in that conference at McGill when we were together, the five mothers, and I was a moderator, and then I had to say all I had to say, and they said all they have to say, and then Philip said, oh, it went very well because very, very powerful people from McGill were here, and I don't know how many lawyers, but more than a dozen of them were part of the audience. But independently of that, they were taking action from that position of power and connecting at a different level that of course involved many different aspects. That's exactly what I have been trying to do in my work, to really understand this complex braid that we really need in these times when we are facing and challenging these situations that are affecting us all.
Gracias. Thank you, Nancy. I would like you to meet Alicia. She is your community member, and she's going to share a little bit about who you are, and then I'll hear your questions.
Well, I also want to say, just like now, go for sharing. Yeah, I'm actually the coordinator of the research chair here, but I'm so glad to be able to listen to you here today. And I'm also a student here at Concordia doing my master's. A lot working with my own data and being able to kind of, highlight and bring back these important stories that we have within our family and this element of healing as well. And kind of continue this work as well in line with working with other elders within Guanajuato, and just kind of this importance of sharing it to the next generation, continuing this aspect. But it's so inspiring all the work that you do, and I honestly didn't have too much of a question, but just like this, so much of what you were saying, it just makes me think of so many things. And I was like, I can sit here, listening to you share all day. And I love how you have these side stories, and you're like, oh, it is for another time, or I won't share this right now. But it's just so important to be able to kind of share these, and I feel like as a youth too, it's so inspiring to hear. And it makes me think recently where actually when Kathy and I were in Australia, talking, we were at a world conference with other Indigenous people, and they're like, oh well, compared to Australia, Canada, you guys are so advanced. And I was very shocked by that kind of statement, and I was like, advanced, in what way? And they're like, your kind of presence is felt a lot more in Canada than, let's say, versus here in Australia. But you kind of look around the city and you're like, where is our presence felt? You kind of, as soon as people arrive, none of our history is gone, and all these elements that you're kind of talking about, where they're removing the soil, which holds so much history, so many stories, it's gone, and it's just it's definitely a worldwide struggle. I think that everyone's feeling, from country to country. But I find it crazy, and you still have, things today that are being done, continuing to kind of erase our presence and kind of silence our voices. But I just for all your work and just being here to kind of share this, and I think just bring inspiration to, hopefully those who are listening, and for other youth who kind of want to kind of come in this fight with,
allies and whatnot. But just now, go up.
Thanks, Alicia. Does anyone else want to offer a question or reflection or song?
Well, so if there are any questions on Zoom, we're happy to read them out, or just raise your hand. We can try to make.
Why is it that the presence of like even people who are not Canadians, and why would there be such, I mean, the presence here is almost like some of us, most of you, maybe Métis, and one or two Canadians interested, but the bulk of Canadians just don't seem to be involved. And how could we get them to be more, that the issue of Indigenous people is really important? Because I'm an original immigrant, and you know, it's like almost like to my friends and to my community, the issue is not present, it's not being addressed. How could it be, you know, known to others that this is important and we have to focus on it? You know, what could we do?
So we consist of like around maybe 1% of the Canadian population, and I think hosting events like this definitely helps us share our lived experiences and to let people know that we're still here. But I do think that because of the injustices that our people have experienced at the hands of the government, that's not something that they really want to openly share. Like, oh, by the way, all of this land was actually stolen and it's unceded. And so, you know, it's just, it boils down to the individual and the work that everyone is doing collectively, and then the people who care to learn about who we are. And what's really interesting about Montreal that a lot of people aren't aware of is that this was actually home to the Bear Clan. And there were many Bear Clan longhouses here. And it was a gathering place for all of the nations to come and trade their goods every summer. And so this is where, you know, people from different nations would meet each other and, you know, potentially get married in the future and have a family. And usually the man would follow the woman and move to the woman's village so that the children could be raised within their clan families. And we would receive goods like as from the north, and we would also receive sealskin so that we can make our winter wear. And this was just one of many stops along our trading routes, which went all the way down to South America. And so when I was a child, I met women from Guatemala who said, you know, the people from the north in your nation used to come to my village, like, you know, before the settlers arrived here. And it's considered a sacred place, and there's still the original seating arrangements. And I was raised in that village, and I know where your people sat. So there are people, even though we've experienced so much violence, there are still people out there in the world throughout Turtle Island who still have this knowledge. It's just a matter of us coming together and sharing what we know. For example, when I was maybe 14 years old, I met women from like so-called Mexico, and they were Incas, I believe, and they actually, don't quote me on the nation, I'm not sure if that's correct, but they were indigenous people from so-called Mexico, and they came to my community and they said, we have a story about our people like coming to the north, and that we are all the same people. Before the settlers arrived, we didn't have borders. And so they shared a story about the indigenous doulas, and they planted the umbilical cord of one of the children in their group that was recently born in Mohawk territory. And then they shared their creation story with us, which was very similar to ours. And I thought that was very interesting and eye-opening. And so I've just been meeting people from different areas of the land to gather information and share information so that we can really piece together our knowledge. And it's a really beautiful thing. And yeah, I do feel like people need to, you know, there are a lot of people who are interested in Indigenous history and culture, and I definitely appreciate, you know, the fact that there are people out there willing to learn about us and work with us.
We're very great storytellers too. And I have a story to tell you about Quebec. You know, we've always had our run-ins with Quebec. In 1793, there was a big battle going on in France to kill off the monarchs and the clerics. There was a big revolution going on there. There was 4 children, and one of them, they don't know what happened to that child during all of this that was going on, because Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI had, you know, they had their heads chopped off. And so they were killing off the entire family. And there was one child that died, got sick and died, and 2, and I think it was a governess or somebody like that, brought the 2, decided to escape, and so she went and took them to the northern part of France to go on a ship that was heading to the New World. So that ship got attacked by the British, and it went down, and one of the boys died, the other one survived, and the governess. So they went on the British ship and came to North America, and they landed there on the eastern seaboard, where our people from Ganawage go and trade every year. They go down there, and so she landed there, and she watched everybody, and she became friends with the Mohawks. And then she eventually asked them if they could take care of her the boy. She told the boy, I think, never to tell anybody that he was the son of Louis XVI, because they were looking for him. Huh? Anyway, so our people said, oh, of course. And I think they were called the Dauphin. Anyway, so she didn't come back. She left, and she didn't come back. So they brought that boy to Ganawage. He was about 10 years old. And somehow the church knew about him. And of course the church was on the run too, over there. But they wanted to get the throne back. And here he was, he's right in Ganawage. Anyway, for about 5 years, our men used to take him over to the East Coast, and thinking that that woman would one day come back and find him. And she never did. So they said, okay, well, so he got adopted in Ganawage. And there's a family there called the DeLilles. That's the descendants of this Dauphin. Anyway, so eventually he married, but the church got involved with all this. And they started having children, this family. And the church was encouraging them to all have children with each other, because they wanted to go back and take France. And anyway, so he had children. And the families are still there. The DeLilles are still there. And inbred. Not all of them. I'm going to tell you something else about that. So he left for a while, and he went out to Wisconsin, and he married an Oneida over there, and he had some children over there. But he came back because he had children in Ganawage. So anyway, so now, well, it's been quite a long time, and anyway, the family that's there, one of them is me. I am a descendant of that family. That was my grandmother. Her name was Gahandinekta, and she refused to intermarry. So she married my grandfather, whose name was Horn. His last name was Horn. And they had, and that was during the time, of course, when we were losing our children. They were, you know, our population was going down. Anyway, so this was in 1907 was when the bridge went down in Quebec City, and we had about 35 of our men working on that bridge. Oh, that's how many died. They didn't all die, but I think 35 or 33 of them did. So what was left was 76 orphans, and of course Canada immediately claimed them as orphans, and so they started taking them, even though the women were still there. But anyway, in the meantime, my grandfather Horn, he was actually he was a worker on that bridge, and he had 4 brothers and a cousin, and then my grandmother, her husband was working on the bridge. They all went down except for my grandfather, because he came home on August the 29th to bring in the harvest, and he had 3 children. He was a widower. And then they started grabbing our children after the bridge went down. And so they came up with an idea, and they started these marriages. They married off people with each other, and that was how my grandparents got together. And they had, I think they had 15 altogether. She had 1, and then she had twins from the husband that died, and then he had the 3, and then they had 9. Okay, so they had, but I used to wonder why we had so many children, huge families. It was not because the Catholic Church was telling us to do that. It was because they knew about what was happening to our people. So we had huge, huge children. And then on the other side is my mother, and she had, they were the Divos, and they had 10 children, plus I think 3 more. Anyway, so altogether they had those kind of families, because we were trying to replenish our population. That's what I'm thinking, because that wasn't normal for us to have that many children. But anyway, so I was talking to some of my relatives, and we were talking about this whole story, and they are also relatives. And one of them said, you know what we should do? You know, we're having a lot of trouble with these French Canadians here, these French people. They don't like us, and there's a reason for it. We have a pretty bad history going way back. And of course, they haven't been nice to us. And I'm not saying they're all like that, certainly not him. Anyway, but the kind of laws and the kind of society they're making, they're trying to ignore us. But anyway, they said, you know, somebody here is the oldest of that family, of that Delil. And they looked at me and they said, we think it's you. I said, really? Yes. And I think, he said, you know what? We got to go back and claim France. And we'll all go with you. And what will we do? Well, you're the queen of these French people here. You're their queen. You'll know how to deal with them.
I know noticed there was something majestic about you.
So I'm just, you should look up that history yourself. You'll see that it is people in Kahnawake who are the descendants of Louis the 16th, well, that guy, and Marie Antoinette, just out of interest. And there might be a way to solve some of our problems over here.
Yeah, well, I think also for this, yeah, well, all these stories, you know, it's something, there's really so much work to be done for educating Canadians in general, but especially people who arrive in the country, you know, newly arriving people, refugees, and for them to understand, you know, when you look at this Canadian flag, there's a maple leaf on it, you know, what is this thing, Canada? Gantineta often says that, well, Canada actually has none of the criteria to define nationhood, which is having your own language, your own land, and your own culture. Well, Canada is all, you know, European culture. And at some point in 2024, it's starting to look a bit strange to have British institutions imposed on this land, to have this, you know, a tree as a symbol, and all these practices, you know, maple syrup and all that. These were indigenous practices here before, you know. Canadian culture is the roughly indigenous. And Canadian, by the way, also in Mohawk, it is an insult. It means a squatter. It means someone who squats on the land, embeds himself on the land. And so it just seems like, you know, at some point, Canadians will have to look into their own history and see the extent of, you know, what's been recently acknowledged as a genocide, how there has to be something larger, institutional, you know, on all levels of government, and especially the legal system, to really open it to the indigenous traditions that are still surviving against, you know, everything that's been done to make them disappear. And for newly arrived immigrants also to know about this history. This is a country that is recovering from a genocidal endeavor that continued. And, you know, we're investigating about what happened in 1950s and 60s. And it seems like, you know, that's 300 years after the first Europeans arrived. And it's as if nothing had changed. It was still total, full-blown evangelicals, you know, keeping indigenous people from speaking their language, knowing that the power came from there. Just, it's very recent that all of a sudden became this modern nation with a weird identity that we can't really define. Maple Leaf and Tim Hortons. What else is there to Canadian culture? And so I think it's just, yeah, Canadians will have eventually, you know, and soon to come to terms with this identity crisis within this country, and see that the response is to really, for once, listen to these indigenous traditions, how they allowed this land to thrive and survive for so many years before it got, you know, destroyed as it is now. And this is something that everyone should be told. There should be a kit about the indigenous genocide given to immigrants, and so they know that, you know, these traditions, indigenous traditions, are also, even the Canadian courts end up acknowledging it, you know. That's why it's in the Constitution. There's Section 35 in the Constitution acknowledges and affirms indigenous rights, and it's with this very general wording that then the onus is on indigenous people to bring it up in court and to prove everything. You know, it's really not ideal at all, but this Section 35 makes all other laws null and void. That's the way it is framed. There is, Canadian system can't, you know, just disprove that these indigenous traditions are override all the colonial system that's been put in place here. And these are traditions that can be shared these traditions of self-governing families, that you have a procedure to make decisions that actually works, where you don't have to delegate all your power to a patriarchal figure or someone who will decide for the others. And maybe one that could be explained, I know Antinendo would like to explain the Turo Wampum, the Deo Hade, because that was the first agreement that was made between the Haudenosaunee and the first settlers, the Dutch back then. And it gives like a window on the way that these decisions are made in a decentralized way within families, because it's based on acknowledging difference.
Okay, before I go into that, Canadian is a Mohawk word. And it does mean squatters. You know, like, not a very nice word, but that's what it means. And there is a song, I actually wrote a song, and it's on YouTube. Somebody put it on YouTube. And it's called Oh Gunna John. So you might be interested in taking a look at it. It's not very long. But with the Turo, well, the Turo means that there's us and there's anybody else that comes here. But we made these agreements between ourselves, the other Oklahoma nations, Oklahoma people, and we would, we agreed to go down the river of life together, and we would keep our lands, and we would keep our traditions, our culture, our language, and so on, because we are tied to the land. We're part of the land. So we're placed here in this particular area because the land knows us. The land is, we are part of the land. It's not the other way around. So when we're placed here, we have certain things about us that is placed in ourselves as a people. And this happens throughout Turtle Island. And all of our other brothers and sisters, they have their own traditions, their own languages, and their own stories, and so on, that ties them to the land that they come from. And we all love to go back home. We all love to talk about what we remember, what we know. I used to remember my uncles and aunts sitting around talking and laughing and telling stories, and I would just sit there and listen to it. Just wonderful, because you begin to feel for the land. You feel something about it, and it becomes part of you, more and more and more. And you can never get away from that. So many of our people will go away, and a lot of them come back. Sometimes they're old, they're living in California, they have a wonderful place down there. They come back. Or they come back every weekend if they're working on the high steel. But anyway, I remember telling the Minister of Indian Affairs, who's from Outremont, somewhere around here, and what was his name? Mark Miller. I met him at some kind of he was attending things, and he was there. I said, I went up to him and I said, Mr. Miller, I said, I'm glad to meet you. But I spoke in Mohawk, because he said that he spoke Mohawk. So what do you want him to? He said, anyway, so I was talking to him. He's looking at me, and then he starts talking back to me in Mohawk. But it didn't make sense to what we were talking about. So then I talked back to him. Then I realized he didn't really speak it, but he could read it out. Somebody showed him how to read it, and it sounded really good. So I said, I have something to tell you. He said, what? I said, where does the word Canadien come from? It comes from Canada. That's It means a village. I said, who told you that? Well, I learned that, I'm learning the language. I said, well, that's not what it means. I don't know. Anyway, so I tried to explain to him what it really does mean. His face went completely pale. He's pale anyway, and he went more pale. I said, do you see that you're giving yourselves away to everybody in the world? And every time we see that word Canada or Canadien, or you call yourself that, I say, we hear it for exactly what it is. I said, you know where that came from? I imagine it's the Mohawks. He said, yes, it came from us. When did that happen? Oh, a couple of 100 years ago, when we first encountered each other, and you had come in your ship and you tied yourself to the shore, and so we were teaching you how to hunt and how to plant, so on, so that you could survive. We were friends with you. We wanted you to be friends with us. And so we were teaching you that. And then, and you were only supposed to go, one plowshare, in the depth of the earth. But you were going further and further, and really too far as far as we were concerned. And so we started calling you that. They were too deep. They dragged their asses in there, and disturb our land like they're not supposed to. And that was a violation of the Turo. We told you you could do this, but you can't do this. Anyway, so I explained all that to him. And he was very, very disturbed. Not too long after, he was no longer the minister. I said, what are you going to, I was thinking, what are they going to do now that they know? They obviously know. So every time you see that word Canada, you know what it means, eh?
Can you repeat exactly what it means, please?
Kanajam, yeah. It means, it's not a very nice word, but it means dragging your ass, on our, that's what it really means, Kanajam. You're dragging your ass on our land, on our mother. Honestly. And they even went and asked somebody up in Gunnasadaki, and he said, what does Ganajam mean? She says, it means squatters. So it was, they're checking it out, eh? Anyway, it was a long kept secret for a long, long time. We just didn't say anything about it. What can they do now? Got any ideas?
Well, we have the nice thing. We have some gifts for you.
So,
did you want to say something, Prudence? You were waiting for a mic before, or are you good, or?
I can ask something if there's time. Well, first of all, I want to thank you I learned a lot today. So I'm from white settler origins. I'm also a French Québécois. And so I was wondering, I think it's an amazing opportunity to have a conversation about what we can do. I think the government right now is I really don't agree with most of what they do. But there is other French Canadians that think otherwise and that recognize the legacy of Indigenous people, and that recognize that the identity of French Québécois is deeply linked to this, what you were talking about. And I want to thank you because it's also because of your people that I'm alive today, because you helped us survive. And this is recognized by some of the community, especially the artists. I think in the artistic community it's recognized. And so my question was, as a person from white settler origin, what can I do? So there's two parts to my question. What in your perspective, what would be reparation? What would it look like? And what can I do with my own little person?
Reparation? What did you come here with? What did all these people bring here?
You mean my ancestors?
Yes, everybody. What did they bring here?
You mean me personally?
Everybody. You all came here originally with nothing. And then we showed you how to survive. And then, but now you want to know about reparations. You want to know what did you bring here for us to help us? What did you do? That's the question. That's the question I'm asking.
I don't know what to answer to that. I guess nothing. So I guess like reparation is
nothing.
We should give now, I guess.
You didn't bring anything here. Nothing.
Yeah, I understand.
Now, what have you done to our mother, whom we love and we took care of her? What have you done to her? Well, just look around. 10 feet of garbage on top of her. Can't even walk on her. It's so insulting what you did to her. And you put all these buildings up. Ugly buildings. For what? I'd like to know what reparations, what do you think would be reparations? I'd like to hear your ideas.
Maybe I can try to respond as also a French Canadian. I mean, I never felt really close to nationalism in general. Anyways, I think when we look at the history too, like the stories that Antonetto was telling about the Dauphin, you know, the importance of Haudenosaunee, Iroquois, Mohawk, and Nkihaga culture for the whole world is something that we don't know of. But I mean, all these explorers back in 17th, 18th century who would send these chronicles about what was going on here, and these people who seemingly lived, you know, without any coercion and any, you know, authority, who lived in a free way, that they fascinated Europeans. And actually all these philosophers of the Enlightenment, we call them, they were deeply inspired by that. They were writing about the state of nature and all these things. So all this modern thought about, you know, freedom, democracy, all these things, were very much inspired by the system that was in place here, the Gainerigoa, the Great Peace. Then Benjamin Franklin in the US, well, you had the French Revolution. After the American Revolution here, Benjamin Franklin consulted regularly with Iroquois, you know, headmen about their system. How did it function in this decentralized way? And he sort of copied this way of functioning for drafting the Constitution of the United States of America. And so it's the very notion of the modern freedom, the modern state, that sort of captured, I call it cannibalized. It cannibalized the indigenous ways here. And so just within, you know, current Quebec society, the way that, you know, when all the unmarked graves issues became really at the forefront elsewhere in Canada, here in Quebec it was sort of, we hear a little about it, but, you know, just there's a few radio shows and it's always the same people, and it's very much, you know, reduced to culture, to just, oh, we'll admit some indigenous songs maybe. And all these historians are trying all the time to prove so hard that we were not as bad as the English people were. Well, yes, we were as bad. Samuel de Champlain, Legault says he was the first to, his arrival here starts Quebec's history. Quebec is not even a French word, it's an indigenous word. Well, the first thing he did was to kill 3 Mohawk chiefs on Lake Champlain in 1609. So this started this war that afterwards has gotten, it wasn't resolved further in history. In 1990, the Oka crisis, these riots by Quebecers, anti-indigenous riots, burning effigies of Mohawks just because they were angry. Because Quebec society that just seems to hate them. Well, I can understand that it must feel a bit like living in Gaza or something like that. That you are surrounded by people who want to get rid of you because you are the detail that they have to get rid of to become a nation. To become, now it's obvious, yeah, Quebecers, we come from the St. Lawrence Valley, this is our land. Well, wait a minute. And there's all these narratives in archaeology even saying, oh, well, the people in St. Lawrence Valley, even Montreal, they were from a separate people, the St. Lawrence Iroquoians, they call them, as if they just vanished in thin air and had no relationship with contemporary indigenous people existing. And these narratives pervade scientific, scholar, academic, media narratives about indigenous people. I personally think this has to stop. The first thing is to stop this entirely and just say, wait a minute, what happened these last 500 years since our ancestors came here?
About everything.
Yeah, just talking about the truth of what happened. And it's possible, my ancestors arrived in the 1640s and they were poor from France. They were perhaps they were escaping, I don't know what happened, why they came here. They must have been poor in France or something. But they were still, taking someone else's land. But it's not, as we said before, it's not you're taking someone else's property. Is that you're making up this new category that there is such a thing as property. And you're stealing it from the future generations, actually. So I think there is perhaps one little, beacon of hope. What I tell often, settlers were asking, how can we help? I tell them, well, one thing that indigenous folks always insist on is coming from the land. It is coming from nature. So whenever you're defending nature, you are defending the interests of indigenous people. If you're fighting against this Northvolt new battery plant in the South Shore, well, just indigenous people don't have the time to fight every single battle. There has to be, settler populations also doing it themselves and believing in themselves, not feeling bad, just we're doing this for the planet because this, and I think this is also helping indigenous people.
So I think you asked a really wonderful question, and to me, I feel like, I know we've talked about a lot of things that have happened in the past, but currently, something that's very, very current is that they built the Highway 30 expansion on our territory, which was unceded lands, and there was a resistance towards that from the grassroots people. I believe I was 22 years old at the time when I was a part of that. And we're currently running out of land in Ganawage to be able to sustain our community. And so we need to have our lands returned to us for our future generations. And it's really disheartening as an Ukwehue woman to take a drive through, I recently took a trip and I went down the 87 and I saw how much land was out there and how beautiful it was and how big the yards were and the rivers and the lakes as I was driving along the highway. And I just feel like in a sense, you know, like our communities were initially built to be war camps, and I mean, I just feel like we do need to have our lands returned to us, that it is our right, and I don't see why we can't have our lands returned to us. And a lot of the land in Ganawage is toxic. There's a lot of people who are sick with cancer. Just between Hadinata and I, we're both survivors of cancer. So like I strongly feel like this needs to be addressed because the government knows that our people are ill because the land is ill. Our medicines are also sick and toxic, and this is a really big issue that people are overlooking. And it's a current issue. It's not something that happened a few hundred years ago. I was diagnosed with advanced stage breast cancer when I was 30 years old. And I've lost a lot of family members to cancer. And it's because of the toxic dumping. And a lot of this went on in the 60s. And we've lost a lot of people, and Akwesasne is also an area that is really, really dealing with a lot of cancer in their communities. So returning our lands would be number one, and there's absolutely no reason why we should have to deal with the gentrification of our community. A lot of us can't afford to purchase an acre of land. And we keep hearing that the land is running out. How can the land run out? We're indigenous people, we're Ungwehwe people, there's land all around us. Why are we still trapped on this tiny postage stamp? So I think that's number one. Number two is when we're searching for our missing and murdered children, support us in every way possible. Support what the archaeologists and the experts recommend, whether it's cadaver dogs, sonar detection, whatever it may be, support it. The faster we get the work done is the faster that people can move forward. And why wouldn't someone want to be a part of healing what has happened and to helping families and to seek justice for the victims and to find them and their children? So I think that's what being a good ally looks like, and yeah.
Thank you. Just very quick. Thank you. Yes, I mean, I am also a migrant. You know, I'm not from here. I said that from the very beginning, but then I feel this is my problem too because I am part of the same creation. We are all part of it, and we really need to question our own worldview and understanding of the world, and that's something I have learned from many of the communities and indigenous women leaders I have worked with, and we really need to question what we know and how we act, and that could be also a starting point on how really to answer that question. You know, it's like instead of looking at this as if it is an external problem, we should make it our problem because it actually is our problem. And that's also reflected in many of the problems we face. And I'm glad you mentioned how difficult it is in terms of our health and how medicalized that health is, but how disconnected the answer it is to our land and how that disconnection also reflects the damage done to this land. So it's really making an effort here to understand and to really respect indigenous knowledge and the word, because they have been for centuries, for many years, insisting and saying this is not going in the right direction, but then we don't know where or why we always lose the point and then we get back to the same point and things are advancing whilst we are not. So that's why I think that, you know, changing our position, our perspective, changing our personal awareness and also understanding that we are part of that creation. If we are here, also because creation thinks that we should be here. You know, I never plan to be in Canada for many different reasons. It happened to be that I am here, and in a way, I feel that it's also this thing that you mentioned before that's so important of connecting with others and trying to be this kind of translator, or at least I am thinking of how to learn from them. And from that learning, trying to respond to what I can from my possibilities too, but also, you know, joining their efforts so that our efforts are stronger and going in that direction that Mother Earth is calling us to move. Thank you.
Thanks. So we have some gifts that we would like to.
Can I just make a statement?
Of course. Yes.
Well, the main thing I think that has to happen, first of all, not 1 square inch of this land was ever sold because it can't be sold. I told you that. So you're living on, you're still squatting on our land. Now, you have to understand that. So, and when you're talking about an advanced civilization, I don't consider this advanced myself, but you do. But that's not, but you never asked us if you could do all this. We were never asked, never consulted about the destruction of our land. And as I said, the important thing is you've got to learn everything there is to know, the truth about yourselves and what you did to us. And none of the land, as I said, has been sold. So therefore, you can't give us back what's ours. It's ours. All of it. And there are people here that are struggling to stay alive, the Palestinians. They came to us because they knew what had happened to us. But they were shocked that nobody in Canada knew, but they knew all about it. But they didn't know they were. And I think people that John are starting to learn. They're getting more and more open because the information is coming out. And I don't think any of the people that are here from elsewhere ever asked us if they could come and live on our land. And what were you supposed to do if you did? There was a way. You could learn to live according to our way, the Guyana, the Great Peace. And that would change a lot of things, would change the terrible destruction that's going on throughout Canada, and especially the continuing death of our people. That has to stop, and you have to stop it, because it's in your hands. We're trying really hard to tell you what the situation is. Now we want you to start trying hard to do this, to do what we're doing, and trying to put this into something that's a daily thought. When you wake up in the morning, we're talking about Canadians, when you wake up in the morning, you think about the Guyana Goa. You do the Ohandu Bari Wadeko. And you think about every facet of Turtle Island, which is beneath the ground, on the ground, in the sky, and beyond. Think about all that and fix it. That's what we're asking you to do, is fix it. If you can't do that, then you gotta leave.
So we have to take care of ourselves and stretch ourselves to be able to live up to this task. Like you said, it's a daily task, a daily practice.
You don't belong here.
Well, I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for coming and showing up and telling your story yet again. Like lots of people say, oh, here we go again. You have to tell all these people all these things because they didn't, listen the first time. And so thank you for being patient with us. Elise, do you want to, we have some things for you, and I'm just going to grab something here. I'm going to come behind you, Your Majesty.
And I don't speak a word of French. There you go. I'm the Queen of France. I think I'll go over there. First thing is Mohawk is going to be the official language over here.
So I would like to invite all of you to come and form a half circle here, and we're going to sing an honoring song for our guests today. Take a breath. I don't sing so low. So, Heichka, Kwe Kwe, and thank you very much for coming and being in conversation with us today. And I know that I leave part of my heart in this circle and just really send you love and life force, and we'll be following this with great interest, and of course teaching about it here at Concordia and really wanting to bring those children home to you.
Can I just say one more thing?
Of course.
When you're saying that you're leaving your heart, how about your mind?
Thank you. Yes, I'll take my mind everywhere I go. I will never lose it.
Because you can have your heart changed. You can get a transplant. And when you say it, you're thinking with your heart. So whose heart are you thinking with? Somebody that transplanted it to you.
I try to think with my heart and feel with my mind, but you know, it's all confused.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for
very
coming.
much.
I'm really, really grateful.
Thank you so much for this.